So good morning to everybody and welcome to Troopers. I'm happy to see a lot of faces that I've seen last year, so it seemed last year's Troopers delighted some people. My name is Enno. I'm the founder of ERNW, and as such I'm kind of the organizer of the Troopers track, and I will be the chair of today's Troopers track, or at least sometimes of it. And I'm in the fortunate position to be the keynote on some security basics. It's about security mindsets and about simple things that might help to increase the security in organizations and that are often overlooked. The title, Stop the Madness, was chosen, obviously it was chosen deliberately, as I'm working in the security field since '97, and my main role in the meantime is to consult to CSOs or CISOs, as we say in kind of German, on their daily business. And it won't be a surprise if I tell some of you that sometimes working in large organizations and being responsible for security might be kind of tedious work and annoying work. And from my experience, there are certain things that go wrong currently in the security space, and I'm going to cover those. So far, this year hasn't been a very, say, pleasant year for quite some ISOs, for people responsible for security. One of the reasons for this is configure. I assume everybody here in the room knows what configure is about. The interesting piece is, once talking about configure, one has to understand what configure does and how it worked. In short, configure is a piece of malware that occurs in different variants. The first variant did kind of classical exploiting of a vulnerability, this one. So it was a kind of self-replicating entity that we usually call a worm. This entity has turned out to be a rather sophisticated piece of code, using in later variants stuff like MD6, newest crypto code. The interesting thing is, in the first variant, it spread by exploiting a vulnerability. In the next variants, it spread, amongst others, by putting itself on USB media. It tried to brute force passwords, and all the stuff that configure, that really hit hard many organizations, all the stuff that configure did was quite kind of simple stuff. So it might have been an idea to prevent stuff like configure with simple recipes and not with, say, overblown, multifunctional, complex technologies. Asking yourselves, how could have configure stuff, that stuff have been prevented? Facing that question brings up, say, the insight that in most organizations that were hit by configure, and quite some were hit. So we have large customers that were hit. It depends a bit on the industry sector, especially those customers with large production plants. They were hit hardly by configure. And all of those have at least one antivirus solution in place, and still it didn't help. The question is, why didn't it help? The answer might be, whatever the answer is, we could ask ourselves, could we have done better? Shouldn't we have known in the year 2009 how to prevent stuff like configure? And still, it was there, it still is there, it has been widely spread, and maybe we should have known better. We should have had the right approaches or recipes to address this stuff, and I'm convinced we can do better. I'm sure we can do better info security implementation than we have been doing in the past. Point is, how could we do better? Let's have a look at a typical ISO's workbench. There might be, most probably there's coffee, there might be some nicotine as well, and the whole bench is covered with stuff, with security controls, security instruments, which might be firewalls or IDS, IPS stuff, PKI, all the stuff that clever salespeople try to sell you. Those of you responsible for security might know every some weeks somebody knocks at your door like, oh, we have this solution and buy this and you will be secure. And this is even more in times of economic crisis. It's like they have even more time to put into sales in some organizations. So some of you might know this, this kind of people showing up and trying to sell you this kind of stuff. Besides this kind of stuff, you might have stuff on your desk like policies and firewall rules, stuff that can't be touched in a physical sense, but still implement security, ACLs, permissions. And you might have stuff like processors, patch management, log analysis, monitoring, incident response. All these are pieces that are on your ISO's desk, which might help you to some degree implement and achieve security. Now, thinking about the role of an ISO, sitting here, being responsible for implementing security, we might try to sort up these things to get into some order, like this stuff is useful, this stuff is more or less useful. We might try to sort it out. What of all these instruments might be reasonable controls? Before we do that, I'd like to remind you, it's all about the role of an ISO, it's all about risk management. It's not about black or white, do this or don't do this, and you should always use stuff like this or that or this stuff. Your role as an ISO is to implement security with a given set of resources. So you have to steer the set of resources. You have to understand where to put your energy in and which elements to use. And this can be broken down to, it's all about risk. I will repeat this several times during my presentation. Keep this in mind. It's all about putting the right resources at the right place to achieve a reasonable level of security. So whatever you do, it should be, say, risk management based. So back to the ISO's workbench. What we have there can be divided into three main categories. There is preventative controls, like think like an immune system. Stuff that helps you that bad stuff doesn't happen at all. There might be detective controls, like a clinical thermometer, like once something happens, we might be able to detect it. And there are reactive controls that come into play once either something bad happened or the circumstances have changed. For example, patch management is per se a reactive control. A patch is applied after a vulnerability gets disclosed. First, there's disclosure of a vulnerability. Second, as a reaction to that, there is applying a patch. So a first approach of sorting out things on the ISO's workbench might be there is preventative stuff, there is detective stuff, and there's reactive stuff. And all these pieces might be needed. Again, take in mind it's about risk management. So you have to decide where to put your energy in. So you have to decide about the proportions. How many of your resources are put into preventative or detective or reactive controls? And my statement is here already things go wrong in quite some organizations. My statement is, putting energy and resources into preventative measures usually has the best cost to impact ratio. So one, say, euro spent on preventative controls has more security impact than, say, €1 spent on detective or reactive controls. You might agree, the problem is, why do you, as a whole, I'm addressing quite some ISOs in organizations here, why don't you act accordingly? Looking out in the world and how security is implemented in an organization, it turns out that quite a lot of effort is put into detective and reactive controls, like finding things like IDS, IPS. IPS per se, there is a P like preventative. Thinking about it, it might turn out it is not really preventative. It tries to detect some things and then continue them from moving on, but still it's about detection. So, putting euros, putting resources, putting manpower into preventative stuff might be a good idea. First main message of this talk. Second approach of, say, sorting the things on the ISO's workbench is one that we call in ERNW the House of Security. Our, say, stance of overall security is that to achieve overall security, there are usually 3 pillars. The first pillar is components, stuff you buy. Pieces you put there. This might be security pieces like, say, a firewall or an IPS or a backup system. Still, it is every technical components in your environment belongs to this space. So, overall IT and security in overall IT has obviously something to do with, say, components that are deployed. Second pillar in the House of Security is what we call implementation. How you set it up, how the stuff is configured. It's not only about putting pieces there or having pieces there, servers that you are responsible for in terms of security. It's about configuring them in the appropriate way. And the third pillar, some of you might not be surprised to see this, is operations, how you run the stuff. And all these pillars, where the second one can be split into different, say, sub-pillars, that is design. Once you have the pieces, like servers, network devices, firewalls, all the stuff, how to assemble it, put the firewall behind or in front of the server, where to place IPS, IDS, all the stuff. Design might play a role in configuration, which bells and whistles to modify in which way. And all these 3 areas, these 3 pillars, must be reconsidered when talking about security. Your role as an ISO is to achieve security, overall security, based on these 3 pillars with a given set of resources. This is again where risk management comes into play. You have to decide where to put your resources. In times like these resources might look like this. They might be limited in some way. So again, it's about risk management, and it's about understanding that security that comes out of, say, this house depends on 3 areas. And having a second look on this, it turns out we can apply this to the ISO's workbench. There we have the components, security components in this case. We have implementation details, like policy steering the behavior of people, or hopefully steering the behavior of people, which doesn't work in many cases. There are quite some people in the meantime who strongly doubt the impact of security policies in different organizations, but this is outside the scope of my presentation. Still, we have the implementation area and we have the operations area, the processes. And it turns out that different organizations put different weight on these 3 pillars. I'm missing a slide here somehow. Okay. I'll stay here for a second. In different organizations, different weight is put on different pieces of this of the workbench. Usually in US organizations with their best of breed approach, they have the mindset of, okay, let's buy the latest, greatest stuff, and once we buy this stuff, once we buy these components, a red appliance and a green one and a yellow one, we will somehow have security. This is how security is done in a lot of, especially US organizations, and they call it the best of breed approach. I'm not sure if this really helps security. I know that some people from the US are here. I know that those people might confirm that this does not always have security. Second, there is organizations who focus mainly on this one. Think of the, say, Linux guys in your organizations, which I call like the itsy bitsy teeny weeny Linux, like, oh, in kernel 2613 we have that flag that could be compiled, and then we have some security. This might be a valid approach. Usually turns out not to be very operations effective, but from the mindset, there is organizations who focus in this area, and there are organizations that mainly focus on this area, where you have to fill in 5 forms to get access to a system, overblown processors, and in the end you get access to a Unix system after filling out 10 pieces of paperwork, and you get telnet access, as they have not, yeah, I mean, putting energy into replacing telnet by SSH would be in this area. Still, you have to understand, the house of security is built on 3 pillars, and putting energy in only one pillar will not help to get overall security. Now, we had those 2 approaches of classifying the stuff on the ISO's workbench. I told you there might be preventative, detective, reactive controls, and we have seen the house of security. And we might be able to merge those approaches. As it turns out, in the area of components, of implementation operations, there is preventative components, there's detective components, and reactive ones. Just to give you some examples, say a backup system is per se a reactive control. It doesn't add any value to the overall security as long as nothing goes wrong. Only once something happened, you might react on that stuff that happened, on the incident, by using the system. So it's a reactive control in the component space. The approach of disabling services is a preventive control in the implementation space. And say if you perform log analysis, this is an operational process and it's a detective process. So this classification scheme might help to understand where in your organization the focus on security is on. Try to sort your own workbench, take the pieces and put into this say matrix, and you will see that you will get a very quick idea. Okay, in my organization we focus on components or operations, and we have a mostly detective reactive approach to security or a preventative one. So understanding where you put your energy in will help on your way to overall security. Okay, so now, yeah, this is the slide I was looking for. Somehow it was in a position where I didn't think it would be. We can skip this. In short, to summarize the house of security approach, from our perspective, from our ERNW security approach, security is about mostly good prevention, it's about visibility, and it's about fast recovery to incidents. And I would like, in the next part of my talk, to put an extra weight on prevention. We put these preacher men into this slide like, okay, let me tell you this. These are the main pieces, and there was one piece From our perspective, well, lots of things go wrong. That's a piece of prevention. So I'll focus on prevention now. Let's have a look how, say, one of the most persistent and common threats in organizational networks, that is the threat of malware. How malware usually works. There are systems, once systems are started, there is processes running on those systems, and now by some magic malware comes arise over the network, infects the process, manipulates the process. Usually this piece of malware tries some so-called privilege escalation, and after that tries to perform malicious actions, which might be attacking other systems or, say, data theft or information disclosure. This is a very simple description of how malware affects the systems. So now let's think about what could we have done once we understand that there is processes running, network packets arriving, and payload that causes harm. What could one have done against, say, this threat? How to prevent those? First step was there's processes running, so it might be obvious. Again, my presentation, my keynote is mainly on very simple things. Simple things that most of you have heard many times in their lives, and still in 2009 I hope to stand here and to tell you those things. First, very basic and obvious approach would be do not start processes, which sounds simple. I mean, think about it, even better, do not install processes or pieces. I assume most of you have heard this message before many times. Still, one could ask, why don't you act on this? To give you some examples of candidates for disabling, say, processes. Some examples to be widely found and heard are disable Sun RPC on Unix systems, disable TCP sworn services on Windows, disable Bonjour on Mac. In the meantime, you might have Bonjour on Windows as well. Those of you who have an iPhone might know you have to activate iTunes on your Windows boxes, which is, yeah, I have a very distinct opinion as to lots of stuff running on Apple boxes as for their security, and it's a horrible idea to get an iPhone up and running to be kind of forced to install iTunes, so you have Bonjour on your Windows systems as well. Yada, yada, yada. All this stuff has been told you many times before. Problem is, I mean, all you knew that. Problem is, all these recommendations, like disable these services, perform hardening of servers and stuff, are based on, say, outdated threat model. The world has changed. Looking at how malicious code gets on system nowadays, it turns out that usually some user or process might be involved. So it's not only about malicious code getting spread by worms, infecting vulnerabilities, infecting services, but it's mainly, nowadays, in modern times, it's mainly about malicious code that gets on system by somehow assisted by a user that uses a different set of technologies, mostly a browser, maybe a mail client, maybe some other pieces. And within those browsers, we have, say, default functionality, like active stuff, Java, JavaScript, ActiveX. One could discuss if Java belongs here or here. I won't perform this discussion now. There is within the browsers, there's add-ons, multimedia stuff, QuickTime Reader Player. There's Flash, there's Acrobat Reader, and both of them, Flash and Acrobat Reader, have scripting capabilities. And this is having a look at how malicious code, malware, gets on systems. It's not only about the old days of vulnerabilities in services and active network component. It's mainly about this space. And again, one might ask, do you really need this? Do you really need all these pieces on your corporate systems? What about JavaScript? Most probably you will need this stuff, absolutely. It's kind of naive in the, say, white papers on browser security. You regularly find recommendations like, oh, you should disable JavaScript. This does not work in corporate networks, as some of you may know. So, yeah, JavaScript might not be a good candidate to disable, at least in your browser. I'd like to ask how many of you need JavaScript in the Acrobat reader, which is enabled by default, and is a source of multiple PDF or Acrobat reader vulnerabilities. Trust me, this is rarely needed, but JavaScript as a whole might be needed. What about ActiveX? Depends. Depends on the, say, application space you have in your organization. If it's mainly Windows systems with, say, in your intranet, Windows-based web services, most probably you will need ActiveX. Next candidate would be Flash. Flash is, there is not too much business use of it. There might be departments or there might be users in your organization which keep telling you, oh, we need Flash. But having a deeper look, which we did in different organizations, it turns out Flash mostly can be disabled. Again, it's about, it depends on your organization, but still remember it's about risk management. If you can get rid of a whole class of vulnerabilities for, say, 5K, 10K, 50K, 100K of users, prevent them from a whole set of vulnerabilities by slightly impacting business, or even have, say, this department is allowed to have Flash within your software deployment process. Overall, in the end of the day, you might have much better security. I mean, there are more candidates. That's QuickTime. QuickTime is a whole bunch of crap for security. So, in most organizations, no need to have QuickTime at all on the desktops, and so most probably you won't need it. And this induces, again, a bunch of security vulnerabilities. Last example, I already mentioned JavaScript and Acrobat Reader. Believe me, you won't need this. We did some field testing in large organizations. This has practically no business impact, disabling this, but it has large security impact. So understand that this is simple stuff. Again, I apologize if I tell you, if I deliver messages that leave you like yawning. Yeah, we know this. Still, I ask, okay, if you all know this, why is the reality, at least that we encounter in customer environments and large ones, why is this reality different? So, understand the business impact might be high, so these might not be widely raised, but there are pieces within this one. There are pieces here that are running on your systems that are responsible for a large set of vulnerabilities that can be, and trust me, I know what I'm speaking of, that can be disabled without too much business impact. So, and this would be a preventative approach, and by the way, we might take the same approach. I know that in many of the organizations there is there might be users who need outgoing FTP access. Still, I might remind you of, ask yourselves how many users really need this. There might be discussions like, oh, we can't disable different kinds of mail attachments coming in, as there are some business units who need this. I'd like to ask you to put this into some decision process and ask yourselves, do we really need this? Do we really need this for a large set of users? and what is the security impact, and then again we have risk management. So there is so much stuff that still can be done out there on security without buying additional appliances or adding complexity by pieces. It's amazing, and it's ridiculous what happens currently out there. Okay, back to our initial problem. We had those components running on systems. We talked about some minutes just about browsers and pieces like Acrobat and Flash and their business versus security trade-off. There's more interesting stuff. What else can be found on typical desktop systems in organizations? There is stuff like local database engine, MSDE, there is stuff like instant messaging, and there is one of my favorite round candidates, the guys from ERNW that are here will know the piece that is showing up. There's rendering machines. Rendering machines, QuickTime is a rendering machine, mostly on Macintosh boxes, but as well on Windows if deployed. And there is stuff like Windows GDI, Graphic Device Interface. And this is an interesting piece of code. It is responsible for rendering of EMF and WMF images. Again, I might ask, who needs this stuff? Do you have EMF or WMF images in your organization? It's responsible for GDI printing. Yeah, but once you print over PostScript or PCL, you don't need GDI printing. So these are the same responsibilities. It might be responsible to some extent for OLE. Again, question might be, who uses this to what extent? More interesting is, it is responsible for MS-07 17, MS-07 46, MS-08 21, 52, 71, and MS 09, 006 vulnerabilities in Windows kernel could allow remote code execution. This is a perfect example of a piece of code that is widely deployed, that is active and running on most of your Windows boxes and large parts of your organizations, which probably has not too much business impact anymore, business use, but still on looking at the security perspective, this piece needs a train of blood. This is all remote code execution, Windows kernel remote code execution. Think about it, Windows kernel remote code execution. This means unprivileged user looking at an image will give a piece of malware attached to this image or somehow embedded into it, full control of the system with high privileges. So, I mean, this is a piece that practically 80% at least, I would estimate, of users do not need at least 80%. It might be 95 in the organization, might be 99, which is responsible for a number of high-profile threats showing up in the last years. And those of you who are responsible for, say, gateway email security or gateway malware security, you will still have a large amount of this stuff showing up. It's about, I'd say, the third most malware still being tried to inject into your networks. So let's face the example, MS-09-007, which is it's about 6 weeks old. That's the piece, remote execution with kernel privileges. What will have happened in most of your organizations once this piece showed up, you will try to patch your systems as long as you can patch your systems. Obviously, there's always systems that can't be patched in production areas. There are systems that have a 30, 60, 90 day until they are patched. You might have deployed signature updates of antivirus pieces. So whatever you did, you will have had quite some expense on the operational side once this security advisory was released. What you should have done instead is disable EMF rendering, which can be done by one registry key. It's one registry key that can be deployed, should be deployable. I'm not an expert as for current state of GPOs, but should be easily deployable by group policy. And once you would have done this, no need to worry about Windows kernel remote code execution in February in the year 2009 again. Perfect example of what currently goes wrong out there. It's not about prevention, it's not about thinking, what do I need on my systems, can I turn it off? It's about, oh, there's a new Microsoft advisory, there's patch day, we have to patch, we have to update antivirus signatures, we have to yada yada yada. All the stuff instead of curing the problem at the cause, disabling components that you don't need. Sorry for bothering you again with this. Do we really need this? Do we really need, in this case, GDI? And there is more stuff on your systems lying around that is responsible for security vulnerabilities, Flash, Acrobat, JavaScript, that you most probably won't need. So the message again, the preventative approach, putting energy on prevention might be a good idea. Still, we have to focus on how malware works. Running processes that run are the first step, or the basis. The second step is, usually stuff comes in over the network. So again, there is basic principles on the network layer that I won't cover in too much detail now, given the character of a keynote. But on the network layer, usually there is basic, what we call basic security building blocks, like access control. If you want to protect an asset within a complex system, try to keep the threat out. If you can't keep the threat out, try to inhibit the threat of being able to reach the asset, or you might put filtering in place, which is not the same like isolation segmentation. But this is basic network stuff. Using these basic network approaches still might in some instances help against malware, but still we have a third step. The third step is the process is somehow, say, infected by a network packet coming in, be it initiated from the outside, be it initiated from the user by clicking on something or opening an email attachment or whatever. Still, this code has to be executed. And again, prevention of this code execution might be performed with simple approaches, which is least privilege, which might be, okay, Windows 1 integrity levels, but which might be as well stuff like DEP, to discuss this in further detail. Simple message again. Do not work as admin. This is so simple. I really thought about including the slide in my presentation. Still, I have a nice story here to tell. Initially, I said my role mainly is I'm kind of the right hand of CSOs in some organizations. So there's a number of CSOs in large organizations that, to whom I have a very familiar relationship. And about 2 months ago, I had a meeting with the CSO of one of, say, Fortune 10 German organizations, more than 50 billion yearly revenue. It's a large DAX title. I won't tell you which one, obviously, but the CSO of the, say, of the group is an old buddy of mine, and we had a meeting, and he asked me to give him some document, to hand some document over to him, and I said, okay, sure. Let's assume his name is Michael, which in fact it isn't, but I said, okay, sure, Michael, how do you want me to get you that document? And remember, CSO, very large enterprise. In an industry sector that is quite security affiliated, I'd say. But they have to take care of security for different reasons, and obviously they have to be compliant to SOX and all this stuff. So I said, okay, Michael, how do you want me to get you that document? And he said, can you give me a USB stick? Again, this is a real story. And I was a bit surprised. I said, okay, yes, the use of USB sticks are allowed in the organization. And he smiled at me. He invoked a task manager on his walking machine. And he killed a process called device lock. And I looked at him and said, okay, Michael, yeah, I mean, you are the CSO, so it's all about risk, isn't it? You should know what you do, but may a question be allowed to kill device lock? You must dispose of administrative privileges. But yeah, sure, I have. I mean, it was a box he was walking. It wasn't. He's the CSO. He has no technical responsibilities. It's a box he performs his mail, email, and web browsing and stuff. And yeah, so that was the reason why I put this slide in. I'm still a bit speechless, and this is a real story. 2 months ago, CSO, one of the largest German enterprises. Yeah, okay. Think about it. Do not work as admin or try to limit this, but you already know this. This one might be more interesting. There is, with Windows, but not only with Windows, other operating systems in the meantime dispose of similar technologies as well. There is memory protection technologies. One of the most prominent is DEP, data execution prevention, which can be simply enabled on Windows by, say, a simple click, and this can be even enforced on a hardware level. It's still surprising to see on how many platforms this is not enabled out there. It's a simple stuff. I had this in this slide. It's one, like click one times. There might be side effects, but in the meantime, those side effects are minimal. 2 years ago, it was like you couldn't run. It wasn't enabled for, say, Internet Explorer, as it had side effects on virtual machines, Java virtual machine and stuff running within Internet Explorer. This is 2 years ago. This stuff can mostly safely be enabled by one simple click, and again, this can be deployed by GPO. And this has large security impacts. Last December, there was that famous zero-day exploit for Internet Explorer. There was a well-known vulnerability of Internet Explorer that was widely published, and at the time, no patch from Microsoft existed. And it turned out the exploit code available did not work once DEP was enabled. I know that there is some research going on, and believe me, I'm familiar with the research presented at different conferences, how to circumvent DEP and how to circumvent stuff like ASLR, which is a companion of DEP. I know this stuff. Still, this largely raises the barrier for exploit code getting executed at practically no cost. So again, it's a kind of no-brainer, but still it doesn't happen. Simple measure, side effects have to be evaluated, but still those side effects from our experience in the field are not that relevant anymore. And this quite famous zero-day 3 months ago would have been prevented mostly by DEP. So again, I'm a bit surprised to see not widespread of these technologies. Yeah, there is one technology You might remember we got into this talk by talking about configure, that I have merely not mentioned or avoided to mention in my talk so far, that all of you use to fight malware, and this is antivirus. Why didn't I mention antivirus? So there's a simple answer. Problem with antivirus is, first, remember it's all about risk. It's all about putting resources that are limited into, say, security work to increase overall security. So it's all the times, the role of an ISO, it's about measuring costs and benefits of different controls. And simply said, antivirus has a bad cost-impact ratio. You put a lot of effort into it with not too much impact security-wise. This is at least my experience, my stance, and configure proves there is some validity in my point. And I mean, the resources are limited. So what an ISO has to do is to understand where to put the money, where to put the resources in. And what we at ERNW usually do is to use this kind of, I mean, it's not obviously not an invention of ERNW, those kind of quadrants widely used. You might know the Gartner reports. Those of you with an, say, background in economic sciences might use, say, the stuff from Boston Consulting Group for putting products into this stuff. Still, as simple as this is, it might help you, and especially those you have to report to understand costs and benefits of different security controls. And looking at the controls I mentioned during this talk, we would mostly consider client-based antivirus to be in this quadrant. The security impact usually is debatable. It's not high security impact. Still, it is regarded best practices, and you have to buy licenses, you have to deploy the stuff, you have to deploy signatures. You put a significant amount of resources into somehow maintaining this piece here. There is other stuff like doing filtering on centralized entities, which usually has much better security impact. Still, one has to put quite some effort into it, usually cost-wise. Your mileage might vary. This is just for an illustration. You might put the pieces you might move this over there, or a bit over there, or this a bit higher. You can certainly do this. This is just for, again, illustration purposes. Still, it gives you an idea of how good is the cost ratio, cost-impact ratio of different security controls. Disabling meta files, like I mentioned for GDI, can easily be done. And you notice those 6 advisories I mentioned, with all high-profile, high-impact advisories, which could have been easily prevented by disabling meta files. Same category for DEP. Easy to be implemented, has, in the current space of security, might have large security impact. So this quadrant might help to understand where to put the money in, where to put the resources in. So let me summarize the main points of my keynote. First of all, risk management is essential. Understand where to put the resources, where are the risks, how to steer and control security, and therefore you absolutely need risk management. Second statement, prevention is a good thing. Hopefully I got some of you thinking about how preventive security controls can add overall security. Third, the house of security. This is one of the pieces of my personal message. Understand this. Overall security derives from components, implementation, operations, And in most organizations, operations is the one that put energy here will have a good impact on security. And it's often the simple things in life that help security. Thank you for your time and attention. Not sure if it is so reasonable to put a question and answer section after Keynote. Still I'm available for questions, but I'm available here 2 days anyway. So if somebody wants to ask a question or add a comment, feel free to do so now, 1 or 2 persons. Otherwise, I would hand over to the next speaker.
Patch management, where would you put that on the quadrant? That's reactive, right?
Yes, it is reactive control. I mean, it is still a control that is essential in most organizations. But think about it. Only a component running or deployed has to be patched. Once rendering of meter files was disabled, you wouldn't have to deploy the patch for 09006. So it's reactive. Limiting the attack surface in the first place might be more cost effective. Okay, thanks again for your attention. I'm going to introduce the next speaker, which is Sergey Braitos from